So another project that I worked on with computer science students was they designed games that are used in therapy for students or kids with disabilities. And so these are some things that you can actually, there's the bigger picture. So even though you're not doing therapy computer games, there's a lot of aspects that are related to this that if you decide to do something that works with people as a therapeutic goal would apply. So the reason why we have games for therapy is that you're in your occupational therapy treatment session or your physical therapy treatment session or speech and language pathology. Playing games keeps you distracted from pain. You don't realize how tired your arm is reaching 50, 200 times as you're working on this pattern because you're too busy playing Plants versus Zombies on a touch screen, okay? So you don't notice the pain because you've got that great distractor. And it's a lot more motivating. Good therapy games, what we look at when we choose them, and whenever you're using any device for therapy, this is why we choose this device or love it, is because it is customizable. I can adjust the difficulty of it throughout the therapy session or from session to session to session. The learning curve of how to play the game or use the device is the same, but it gets a little bit harder every time. It's just like when you go for a run. Every time you either try to go a little bit further or a little bit faster. And this would be the same concept, but within a lab or within a treatment environment, okay? So ways that we change the difficulty from a therapeutic perspective is the number of targets. If you change the number of targets of buttons you're trying to hit, that makes you have to hit something a lot smaller with a higher resolution of movement. And so that's really important to a therapist. And then the number of inputs, so whether you can hit one or two things, is a different cognitive load than having to pick between 5 or 10. And so that's why we change that. And then being able to adjust that margin of error. So say I made it harder for you, and I want to ease you into the hard part, so I added extra buttons. But I don't want it to beep at you every time that you do something wrong, because right now we're just getting you used to the idea of the extra buttons. So being able to adjust that difficulty level even after you've gone up a level. For computer games using the screen, audio and visual feedback. The more feedback that somebody gets, especially if there's any sensory impairments, and the ability to turn that off. So maybe the audio feedback causes a startle reflex in somebody with cerebral palsy, and we don't want them to jerk their hand away from the button because that detracts from the mission that we were trying to accomplish. And so we want to turn off the audio feedback. And then we want it stimulating. We're working with kids. We don't want it to be graphic or violent, but really motivating. And the best tools we can use across ages. Now, I would separate out, you got your teens and they're okay with adult things and kid things, but that's a big population that gets missed because there's lots of games for little kids. And there's lots of stuff for adults, but the teens, there's some things for adults, but not very much reaching that therapy goal. So how do you make it fun to a teen, but not at a little kid level with ABCs and Barney music playing and that kind of stuff, okay? And then the best tools are ones that can be used at home too. Okay, shifting gears again. I was trying to just kind of get you exposed a little bit with some of the things. So when we talk about assistive technology assessments, and I want this in the back of your mind because what I'm talking about is ways that a person interfaces with technology. And so if you understand how the person interfaces with technology, and that's my job to help get that taken care of, it helps you understand what some of your inputs could be with your project. So when I conduct an AT assessment, I work with my consumer, which is my person with the disability. All those same stakeholders that you guys work with your design process. I gather information, I analyze it, and I keep going back and forth in my process too. I come up with my goals, priorities, I define my desired features. It's really pretty similar. And then all my possible interventions, I choose the best one and I make a recommendation. What's missing here is that most of the time there's not a prototyping kind of thing because we're just testing equipment that's already on the market. So when we talk about access, we have different control sites. A control site is any part of you that you use with reliable, repeated move that you can reliably and repeatedly use. So if you can move your head reliably and control that well, that's an access site. Within our head, we have our eyes. I don't recommend the ear. I can't move my earlobe, so that would be a poor access site. My mouth, using my lips and my tongue, or my voice, or using the entire head. With my hands, I've got my fingers. I have my whole arm. I can use my elbow to hit something. That's gross control. My whole hand, that's gross control. If I have muscular dystrophy, spinal muscular atrophy, another form of like a muscular dystrophy, I have great fine motor control. I can move my fingers really well, but I don't have the strength to do any of my gross motor movements that require moving my arm long distances. I have my feet. I can use my whole foot. I can use my toes. Another one somebody threw out last week was using their knee as an option. So you can use a lot of different parts. It's really, we're trying to identify the body parts that you can control reliably and regularly. And with the greatest resolution, that gives us the most options. The other thing we think about with access is what actions are needed to complete a task. So when we think about controlling a mouse, what actions are required, not with the physical act of controlling the mouse, but with moving the cursor on the screen? What actions are required to control the cursor on your screen or your computer? I have 6 of them.
Moving your arm side to side.
Not with your hand, just think about the arrow on the screen part of it. What happens with moving the arrow on the screen? So one of them is moving the arrow. What are other mouse actions that translate from that physical device to something happening on the screen?
Selecting something.
Selecting. Is that how do you select? Click, typically. Drag, that's another select.
Scroll wheel.
The scrolling, that's another action.
Picking the mouse up and moving
That doesn't move the arrow, does it?
it. If you have the active down.
Okay, so that would be an interface. Great. We do a lot of single clicks. Do we do any other types of clicking? Double click and
Right click.
right click. Great. So there's lots of actions that have to happen that we would be looking for in our, so now if I'm working with a consumer and I need them to control the mouse on the computer, I need them to do all 6 of those actions with whatever device I choose. Okay, we'll just talk about that. So for a head controlled mouse, I might look at eye gaze. I can look at an oral joystick. That's a straw that is in the mouth, and they either use pressure or their lips and tongue to do displacement and actually move the joystick. In any direction they move it, the arrow goes across the screen. So we have our movement. They click by sipping into the straw. Taking a drink, that negative air pressure will cause a click. If they blow into the straw to make a positive air pressure, it does right click. And then if they do a really long click, it'll activate the click and drag function so that they don't have to hold that pressure while moving the mouse. So we get a lot of different actions from one device. You can also use a chin joystick and control with your chin. Voice control, you can say mouse grid 1, 2, 7, and hone in on the area you're trying to do. There's a head mouse. It's a reflective dot you wear on your forehead. You put a camera on the computer and it measures the infrared reflection so that it tracks that head movement. There's nothing in front of your face. A lot of people really like not having things in their face. You also have foot mouses. There's lots of different joysticks that are out there that we can use. And this is kind of, again, defining that problem. This is already with technology that's already out there. But like say you were to decide to look at eye gaze as an option. Well, then you have to look at the big picture. You know, how many eyes do they have available to control it? Can they move both eyes together, or do we need to only focus on one eye because that's really the only eye that they have movement of? Can they scan everything on the screen? Can they isolate those actions? Does the device need to be portable? Does it need to be a communication device too? Do they have the ability to install software on the computer so you can use special gaze interaction software versus blow up an area and click on it kind of things? Do they have glasses? Then physically, what's their neck strength? Are they going to be able to sit all day and look at the computer? What's the positioning? Are they going to be able to see the thing when they're doing their pressure relief? Lighting, how are we going to mount it? So there's a lot of things that we really take into that. And then can they click? Are they going to hold steady over their target and just stare at it for 1 second at a time? Or are they going to blink? Do they have the strength and the control to do a half a second blink to do that clicking? Same kind of thing when we look at those oral joysticks. That's what I was talking about, where you manipulate it with your mouth, or you can use a little bit of pressure depending on the one you buy. And so you can puff or sip into the switch to do your clicking. If you can't do that oral motor control, maybe you can hold that steady over your target for a designated amount of time, half a second, 1 second. And then we can also do an external switch that they might hit with their hand or with their finger to do. And then there's a lot of portability. The quad stick is kind of a cool one if you ever were just interested in this, because that one is also used for computer games and console games. And so not only can you control your computer with this, with the mouth and the sip and the puff, but you can also control your Xbox or a PlayStation. So there's a lot of different options that you can do with that one. MO is very similar. With our arm controls, we have to really look at where we're putting it. And then with all of these, we also are looking at where buttons can be, because we might not want to look at just a joystick device. We might need to use switches. And probably with somebody that can't get down and play kind of thing, when you're looking at options, we're probably going to be using some kind of switch for them to control it. And the switch control is just a simple contact closure. Most of our switches are normally open, and so you're causing it, the action will just be a momentary closure that you do. And I can get a big button. I can do a pneumatic switch that you take a drink from the straw. I have a switch that just takes a little bit of movement. We've got fiber optic switches. We have ones that you're just breaking a beam of infrared light. So if we can get some kind of controlled movement that they can do reliably, we can figure out a way to interface a switch with it. Okay, so for text entry, similarly, you can control with your hands, your arms, your mouth, your mouse control site. You can use your mouse as your keyboard by clicking on the keyboard on the screen. Feet, head, lots of options. And then we have tools for one-hand typing. But when we're looking at it, we're looking at your strength, how much you can move your hand, that kind of stuff factors into our decision. So it's a lot of that physical abilities that still comes into all of our decision making and understanding the problem. With mouth control and voice control, your strength of your voice matters. If you're on a ventilator, you can still use voice activation. You can still make the phonation. It's just whether or not it's a different cadence when you have something helping you breathe versus talking. And voice recognition software recognizes whispers. You don't need a loud voice in order to use voice recognition tools. Okay, skipping back. So if you are interested in working with kids, really with all people, when you work with somebody in particular with a disability, but whenever you're trying to get a lot of information from somebody, you really want them to be comfortable. If they're nervous talking to you, you don't get anywhere near as much information from your customer. And this really does apply to the broader spectrum of all customers, not just people with disabilities. So are they physically comfortable? Not so comfortable they're going to snooze on you, but hopefully you're interesting enough that even if they're really comfortable, they're not going to do that. And then, are they emotionally comfortable? Are they anxious? A lot of disabilities have comorbidities of anxiety and sensory difficulties, and so we want to make sure that they're emotionally comfortable talking to you. And then, are there other people that you can include in it, your activity? So if your focus was how to make it easier to play, maybe you want to see how they play now. And so you want to include other people so that they're not talking about how they play. Because a lot of people, when they describe what they're doing and what they actually do, those are two very, very different things, okay? And then, is your purpose just to have fun? Or are you also thinking about meeting some therapy goals? And often that's a perk. I mean, if you think about just kids that do not have disabilities, any kids that you see, what is coloring? It's an activity that is helping them grow their fine motor coordination. Playing with Legos, it's a toy, but it helps with fine motor development. Playing with a ball, that's a gross motor activity. So there's a lot of games that have those other goals that's not the goal is to have fun, but it also is developing those types of skills. Okay? Safety, it's really important. With adults, there's a little bit more of a level of assumption that you can do. If you say, don't do this, it's going to hurt you. Most adults without a cognitive impairment will follow those directions and remember them. Or if you put a red sticker on it that's with a no symbol or something, they're more likely to process that. You don't want to assume that a kid will process that. So you need to really, really make it a lot much more safe. Good English there. Okay. Safe environments. If you're going to work with a kid, you never want to be alone with the kid. That's for your own safety. No accusations can happen if you're never alone with the kid. Okay? Also, having the parents around makes everybody a lot more comfortable. So, just having that. And then there's a balancing act, and this is kind of what I was talking about with the autism earlier. Your parents, you want them to have a say, but don't forget that the kid is your customer and the person that you really want to be talking to, and you don't want to leave them out of the conversation. This is not the go play, mom and dad are going to talk about you now. You really want to keep them included in it. Okay, Devin and I were talking, and I had a couple of ideas that you guys could use your microprocessors with. And one of them is texting and email alerts. And I have a specific client that this kind of came to mind with. I was actually going to use my Raspberry Pi and develop it, but we haven't gotten the funding for it. And probably won't, because the development time, it's not very cost effective for the funding agency to hire us to do this for the amount that she would do it. But the background story is I am working with a 20-year-old who has autism. Autism is a spectrum disorder where it really is an impairment in the ability to communicate. Whether that means processing cues and social cues, similar to Asperger's, which is a type of autism, or the verbal communication to get your thoughts out. And a lot of times there's the breakdown between the brain and the motor movement, so it's all up here, it's just the getting that communication out. It's also other communication, so all the sensory stuff that's coming in, the lighting, the background noise of the fan on the projector, all of that is coming in at somebody with autism a little differently than it does your typical person, neurotypical person, okay? This person has a lot of physical impairments that are also part of the autism. Doesn't have a lot of control of her movements. She uses her head to control her communication device that talks for her. And she wears a reflective dot on it. However, this device is Windows XP, and there's not funding to update it to a more current operating system. So it's outdated and it can't be updated, and there's a lot of bugs and problems. So we can't use it for how she controls the computer. So when she has a work job, she's doing data entry on a computer, and we switch her over and we take her communication device out from in front of her and put her in front of the computer with the head mouse that's using that camera with the reflective dot. She's skilled at using it, but sometimes she needs to communicate, whether that be you forgot to put the dot on my forehead so that I can do my job, or I need to use the bathroom, I'm having an emergency, I need some help when you get a minute, or I need my communication device because whatever I need to tell you, I can't tell you with those 5 or 6 options. And so what we have brainstormed, she used to use scanning, which is an option where you hit a switch and it goes through all of your options, and then you hit the switch again to select it. So if we had some kind of device that quietly either lit up or provided an auditory beep, and she could count her beeps or hear, maybe it has lots of different tones, and the right tone is associated with a message, she hits the switch again, and it would send a text to somebody in the work environment that says, hey, I need some help, or whatever that message is supposed to be. The reason why we want something that's a little more silent and discreet like that is because the alternative is wigging out, and people perceive you differently if you kind of do some arm spasms and that kind of thing to get somebody's attention. And we don't want her to be perceived differently. It's already hard enough with the environment that she is working in, and with her wheelchair and her communication device and all of that kind of stuff. So that was one idea that I had, and it's an application that I hope to get to someday, because I think that I could use it with future consumers too. I don't have a significant amount of free time in order to explore that myself, but I hope to someday. And then the other big one is playing, and that's a much more broader thing, and so I kind of referenced it throughout the rest of the talk with you guys. But playing is something that a lot of kids with disabilities just can't participate in fully. So I don't have any big concrete answer. I mean, right now we have a way to use action figures through a switch. But is there more playing that kids could be doing and participating in that is the same way their friends and peers are playing, that could be accomplished through the use of your microcontrollers? And then the common disabilities that we work with in the child populations, if you are gearing towards kids, is cerebral palsy. And that's basically a traumatic brain injury that happens before you turn 2 years old. Usually it's in the womb, but sometimes it is falling when you're a young kid kind of thing, or a surgery going wrong. And that, like a traumatic brain injury, has a lot of variations in how it affects you, but a high prevalence of it is spastic cerebral palsy. So sounds and stuff like that will trigger a spasm, and it's just very hard to control the fine motor movement. There's also a lot of, it's part of the spasms affects the tone of your muscles, and that's also affecting that motor control. Muscular dystrophy and spinal muscular atrophy, those are where your gross motor muscles are, the connections are either not being made anymore, or there's deterioration in the muscles. And so the gross motor movement's not there, but the fine motor movement is. So playing ball is something that somebody with muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy can't do traditionally, but they can play video games pretty well, kind of thing. Spinal cord injuries with young kids, hockey accidents, trampoline accidents, not a few backflips, that's in the teen years kind of thing. Swimming accidents seem to be my kids in their 20s and 30s. But there's a lot of car accidents and stuff too that'll cause that. And then autism. A lot of highly involved autism is really affecting that motor control again and communication. And I can't think of the name. We have design contests every year with, I am part of RESNA, the Rehabilitation, Engineering, and Assistive Technology Society of North America. That's my professional society. And every year we have a student design contest. And so a lot of years the student team that wins that is something that is a game oriented or play oriented. And this year it was a board game that kids with kids and adults, it was really hitting the older population, that they can play, and it affects sensory, it's got facial expressions and things like that, but they can play that with their peers and be much more involved. But it's a fun game even to people without disabilities. And so that was one of the games. So that if I could, I'll email you if I think of it. But there's a cool video about their process and how they came up with it in their design. It's low tech, but it still is a cool process. So that's everything that I have for you. What questions do you have for me? Because I could talk to you guys for days about what I do. Try to own it into an hour. more or less. Nobody?
What's been your favorite like assistive device that you've like modified or created? Like what's like your
We do a lot of cool things over there in the modification. I mean, one that, a simple thing that I did in my master's program was, you know, the storm windows that you have to push in the little buttons and they each go in and you have to lift them up. So sitting in my office is a device that would allow you to do that if you have one hand. Because how do you do both those actions? So that was, I mean, that sentimental value. It's the first thing I designed. But if you're a teller, we do a lot of customization comes in with the one-hand applications. Because there's a lot out there that's designed for two hands. So we have a clipboard that some students actually modified to be, so you hit the lever and it holds the clipboard locked open so that you can neaten the papers and push them in and then release it and put it down. So you can do all that with one hand. And you know the teller tubes, like at the banks? We have one that you can jimmy open. There's a special card that you use to push that open, and then it holds that open for you. So we've done a lot of things like that. There's some cool customization that we've done. If somebody had carpal tunnel, we do a lot with ergonomics too. So somebody had carpal tunnel and dematting a dog was really challenging. So we put the dematting tool on a whole arm base so that she could use her whole arm to do that type of action. Let's see, some of mine have been really little, like putting custom grips on, I had a manicurist that could not, she has rheumatoid arthritis, so that really affects your ability to grip. So I put special grips on some nail brushes so that she could still grip them and be doing manicures and pedicures. So there's a pretty big spectrum. I was trying to think, what did I just deliver 2 weeks ago? Some custom sip and puff switches that have special mounting, a special clamp. So we have these forearm rests that support your arms. And typically you'd use Allen wrenches and clamp them and tighten them on, but this woman needs to change her workstation and other people use it, but she still had a stroke and traumatic brain injury. She could only use one hand. So the Allen wrenches was too cumbersome, so we just used a couple springs, really simple, but had that as a self-tightening clamp that she could pull off of and put it back on her own independently. Paul's working with my colleague. He's working with somebody who lost her fingers. She was overnight in a car after an accident and couldn't get out, buried in a snowbank, frostbite, and she's a chef. So custom splints and things like that so that she can grip and use her knives and all of her other cooking tools effectively and still be a chef. So there's a lot of things like that it's all one-off, and it'd take me a while to find them, but I've probably got tons of slides about that kind of custom work because it's a lot of fun to do. Any other questions?
With the kind of engineering you do you need to have like a pretty heavy background in biology and stuff as well? Just to know more about the medical end of it? Or?
Not really. Honestly, I did the biomedical route because I was going to design wheelchairs. I went to Michigan Tech. If I was to mentor a student going into it now, I'd say do mechanical or electrical, maybe get a minor in biology, or take some disability studies classes as your electives. You need to understand people. You need to understand disabilities. Biomechanics does not hurt at all to have that background, but knowing how the cellular metabolisms work and everything, that wasn't my shtick. And actually, I helped all my friends through the mechanical classes, and they helped me through the biology classes because I don't need to know how cells work in order to do my job. It's really the macro biology side of things, so not a lot. But understanding people with disabilities, that's the big part. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Megan.